Hey everyone, this is going to be video one of a new series I want to go down. There's tons of lathe videos on YouTube, but very few pertaining to lathes and hobby builders at home who do gunsmithing or suppressor type stuff. And since my audience happens to be Form 1ers, that's the point of view that I want to approach this from. This particular episode, I want to start and kind of skip ahead a little bit to the point where you have already decided that you don't have room for a larger lathe, you don't have money or something for maybe a larger lathe, etc., etc., and you've chosen that you want to go and get yourself one of the very prevalent currently mini lathes or benchtop lathes out there. In front of you is my own example of a benchtop mini lathe. It is an 8x16 Grizzly. 8x16 is a touch larger than what a lot of people first look at, I should say. A lot of people look at like a 6 or a 7, like a 7x12, 7x14. I'm going to approach this video, though, from the point of view that you know absolutely zero about how to choose a lathe, what to look for in a mini lathe, just general information about it. And then as these episodes progress, we'll get more and more refined into what tooling that I have found works for Form 1 kind of stuff, and just general information. So let's get started here. I want to start with basically what do those measurements mean that I just said. So I said 8x16 for this lathe. Echo Machine has a really good video out there. I recommend you watch it, about choosing larger lathes for gunsmithing purposes. He goes into, a lot of some of the things that I'm going to go into, but I'm going to go into it from the perspective of a smaller lathe. So how big is this thing, first off? This is my hand. Not that big. It can kind of look a little bigger than it is, to be honest with you, on video. But it weighs around like 150, 160 pounds. It's, as far as lathes go, that's super light. As far as you trying to pick it up, that's heavy, obviously. So first things first, what is an 8x16? That means we can fit something that is 8 inches in diameter and clear of these bedways. This is your lathe bed. This is your chuck. This is your spindle. Your gearing is in this portion here. For me, not all lathes are going to have this, but this is a reversing box. You'll also see a quick change gearbox on some lathes here. We'll go more into all that. This portion here is going to be your tool post, your compound, your cross slide. This here is your saddle. These are the handles that operate such things. This screw looking thing is how your saddle moves back and forth, and also how you thread. It gets engaged by this handle here, which closes half nuts. You can hear them in there. They are like 2 nuts split in half, and they go around and engage the lead screw. This is your tailstock. So that's where we're going to start here. Alright, so what does 8 by 16 or 7 by 14, 7 by 12, 6 by whatever mean? It means we can take something that is, so in this one, an 8-inch lathe. We can take something that is 8 inches in diameter. We can stick it in our chuck. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that your chuck can fit something that large, but if you could fit it in there and basically spin it and clear what we call the ways on the bed. The 16 part means that if we had this chuck off and we had a center in the spindle here, and we had our tailstock here all the way back, we could put a metal bar between the two, and that bar could be 16 inches long. Okay? So those are very important because that tells you what your capacity is to handle material. Once you start going and putting something like a chuck on here, you've got a live center here that sticks out, etc. You start to lose that distance. So that's why that's important. When you want to start doing things like tubes, spacers, and stuff like that, you're going to need some of this distance here. Even if you have the distance, trying to get your cutter to be able to engage the whole distance can be a challenge as well when you've got your saddle hitting up against your base here. So all kinds of things to think about. In my opinion, the 8 by 16 is the smallest lathe I think worth buying. There are plenty of people though out there who use a 7 by 12 or 7 by 14 or whatever. But why do I say that? Well, the 8 by 16 it's got a 3/4 horse motor. Some of them you can even find with a 1 horse motor. So when you're going to be doing things like titanium, 17-4, you really need all the rigidity and power and weight you can get. I'm not saying you can't do it with a smaller lathe, you can. However, I kind of feel like the 8 by 16 is like the first stepping stone where you can do it at a speed and take cuts that are deep enough that you're not going to be there all day. And even still, I feel like you're going to be there longer than you would if you, say, were on a big 13-inch big old lathe. You know, with 2 horsepower or 5 horsepower, something like that. That being said, rigidity is everything, and that is what allows you to do things. And all of these Chinese lathes, with the exception of probably Precision Matthews, the brand Precision Matthews, though they don't make anything smaller than 10, is going to need some sort of work out of the box. It's just, they're all made Chinese. Some brands get some of the better quality parts from whatever. Some of the brands assemble things a little better. But even the name brands, like this is a Grizzly, that's a fairly name brand lathe, out of the box will have issues. You're looking at some of those eBay brands, the no-name brands, they might all look the same, but they can be even worse. So, what are you looking at first off when you decide you want to buy a lathe? Well, like I said, right off the bat, you're going to want to look at how much horsepower the lathe has, how big of work it can handle. The type of motor is going to be a big thing. You're going to have DC motors and AC motors. The type of speed control, basically how fast can the spindle go, okay? Well, some lathes, like this one for instance, you see has a knob and it has numbers. It can go, depending on what gearing I have set up, it can go anywhere from 50 RPMs to 1,000 RPMs or 100 RPMs to 2,000 RPMs. And because of the type of motor in it, even at those slow RPMs, it generates just as much torque at, say, 150 as it will at, say, 600 RPMs. Okay? Why is that variable speed really nice to have? Well, to dial in your surface feet and get your finishes right, you're going to need to be able to play with that knob and get your feeds just perfect. Now, maybe you don't work on a lot of different metals, or maybe you don't care so much about surface finish. Then, you know, a lathe that comes with maybe, say, 4 or 5 different speeds might end up working just fine for you. It's not necessarily a complete deal breaker, but it is super nice to have. Especially because a lot of those types will also have, if you look up to the left there, a nice quick way to put the lathe in the reverse. Believe it or not, not every lathe has reverse or not. You're going to want to take a look at that. Like I was talking about earlier, this lathe has a gearbox. Okay, now it doesn't have a very advanced gearbox, but it still has a gearbox that I can turn the lead screw on and off and go left or right. Okay, so if you're going to be doing a lot of threading, that's a huge bonus to be able to not have to. I can, for instance, not undo my lead screw handle if I want to reverse or thread away from the chuck or thread towards the chuck. I can put the machine in reverse without having to undo anything with my little switch up there. Not every lathe has that feature. Now, gearboxes get even more involved, and you're not going to see it in a small lathe like this. But when you start getting to your bigger lathes, 10 and up, and there's some on 9s as well, actually, come to think of it. You'll be able to get a gearbox if you want that you'll be able to not have to worry about as many change gears. On the left here, this thing right here, this comes off, and it is full of these little gears, these metal gears, and that is how you change them out and you set your gear ratio to thread your whatever it is you're going to thread. I'll tell you what, having change gears is a giant pain in the butt. I hate change gears. I hate threading because I have to deal with change gears. The next lathe I ever own will have a quick change gearbox, but you're not going to find a quick change gearbox lathe new for probably, I don't know, probably under $2,500, unless you get like a Grizzly, and then you're probably still going to be around $2,000. So something to keep in mind. There's all these little features that you don't really think about when you're first buying a lathe. What next? Alright, let's talk about spindle bores. Your small lathes like this are not going to have a very large spindle bore, with the exception of one model of 8x16 out there. There's no 7s or 12s or 7s or 6s that have this, but there is an eBay model of 8x16 that does have an 1.5 inch spindle bore. This lathe and most of these mini lathes are going to be right around an inch or a little under. This one is. That can be a big deal. If I had an 1.5 inch spindle bore, what I'd be able to do is I'd be able to take something like this 1 3/4, actually it's 1.2 1.25 inch piece of tie, and I'd be able to slide it in my headstock and just have a little bit sticking out to work on. I get around this in certain ways, and I'll go over that in other videos. I won't work on as long of a piece, for instance. But if you're someone who wants to thread tubes, having a small spindle bore, that's a complete deal breaker. You're not going to be able to do that on a small lathe like this. And what I mean is, here's this little dowel. It can go through. Okay, so say you want to work as close to the chuck as possible. So say I want to have a foot-long piece and just work and make cones off the end of it. I can't do that in here. Instead, I'm going to have to take this, I'm going to have to cut it into a shorter piece and put it in my chuck, and that wastes some material. It just is what it is. Now, I can still work on longer pieces, like, for instance, what did I just do with it? Like this piece of aluminum, for instance. I can still chuck it up, and I can take my life center over and hold it here and spin it, and I can work on the outside. But if I wanted to try to thread this end of it this far out, it's going to get pretty challenging. I can get a steady rest and hold it this far out and have it sticking out, but now, you know, I might not have the bed length to get my saddle all the way over and still reach the end. It just depends. You have to get a little more creative when you have a smaller lathe to do different sorts of things. Work holding is a big one. Now let's say you do end up buying a lathe that has an 1.5 inch spindle bore. Doesn't necessarily mean that the chuck that's going to come with it doesn't necessarily mean we'll have a hole big enough. So you might end up having to buy a more expensive chuck that does have a large enough chucking hole. That's a 6-jaw chuck. That chuck, I like 6-jaw chucks. They are great for holding round material, like tubes and stuff. Where a 3-jaw, which is what's probably going to come with your chuck, and it might, or your machine, and it might actually come with an independent 4-jaw as well. Not so much. I mean, don't get me wrong, people get by with them every day. They're not going to hold the work as accurately either. But, yeah, that's a future upgrade type thing. What else? None of your mini lathes, other than like a Precision Matthews, are going to come with already installed quick change tool post. But that is something you definitely want to look into. But that's, again, for another video. We'll get more in depth and that kind of stuff. But long story short, in my opinion, an 8x16 is the smallest lathe. It's really just starting out to be capable. There's a ton you're not going to be able to do with it if you really want to like do this kind of stuff a lot like I do. No. But if you're someone who just wants to make D-cell size cones, or I even make 1.5 style size stuff. And I actually even do bigger stuff too, don't get me wrong, but it just gets challenging. But the point of this video is so you know what to look for, and what to look for basically is going to be what your motor is, what kind of power it's got, does it have reverse, does it have variable speeds, does it have a gearbox, what kind of gear train does it have. Some of the smaller lathes have plastic gears instead of metal gears, etc., etc. You know, what accessories it comes with. That's another thing. Does it come with a 3 and a 4-jaw chuck, or does it only come with a 3? Maybe it comes with a life center already. Does it come with steady rest? That's that thing that I showed you that holds the tube. Does it come with one of those already? A lot of them do. Now let's get into the kicker about Chinese mini lathes. They're all pretty much junk, absolute junk out of the box. And what I mean is inside all your moving assemblies are these metal strips called gibs. And I'll grab one for you. And they're going to look like this. Okay. And this is what takes up and gets the slop adjusted in each moving portion via these little adjustment screws, okay? Now if you look at mine, I've added more to try to get more rigidity out of this. I've done a lot of different things with this lathe to make it more capable. Out of the box, this thing wouldn't take much more than like a 25 thou depth cut on mild steel without chatter. You probably might not even know what that means at this point, but trust me, that's not very impressive. Which goes into the quality of the brand. You're going to want to try to get what you can, but they're all going to need some sort of help. They get assembled with like this thick like assembly lube, I want to say, and it has like gunk and casting material and lapping compound in it, and it'll be, you might not be able to see it when you open your box and you're looking at your lathe or whatever, but it's there and it's in the moving assemblies. First thing you want to do when you get one of these lathes, and it's something you're going to have to think about because it's going to take some time. You're not going to be able to, or at least you shouldn't, just open this bad boy up and start playing with it. Is you're going to want, and there's lots of videos on YouTube, by the way, on how to do all this stuff. But you're going to want to disassemble your compound. You're going to want to take your cross slide off. You're going to want to take your saddle apart. And you're going to want to literally take the gibs out, take these lead screws all out and adjustment screws, and you're going to want to clean them thoroughly. The chuck that it comes with, you're going to want to disassemble it and clean it thoroughly. You'll be surprised at what you find inside of them. Once you've done that, now you can start taking a look at just how true the ways are, how true the gibs are, and what that means is how straight and flat and serviceable they are. The gibs that came in this Grizzly, and this is one of them, I don't know if you can tell, but this thing is like a boomerang. This thing was god-awful terrible. You're going to want to take a piece of, I don't know if you have a granite countertop at home, that'll work, and lay them on there and see just how bent they might be. And you can take a hammer and you can try to straighten them out. Then you can take and lap them and get them as true as possible. Some of your surfaces in your compound and your cross slide, you might need to take like a diamond lapping deal and lap them and deburr certain things. Adding adjustment screws like I did, that's going to be able to make pressure points farther apart and make for a finer adjustment of the gib and how tight it's pressed against things. I added 3 on that one. That particular compound came with 4 already. A lot of your mini lathes are only going to come with 3 out of the box. So it's kind of nice that Grizzly had already added 1, but it's still not enough. The saddle. You might not be able to feel it on yours when you first get it out, but it might be a little loose. A lot of these saddles will need work, almost all of them. And I'm not just talking adjustment work. You might need to get shims of some sort. You might need to decrease the thickness of the plates that go on the bottom of the saddle. And again, there's videos for this kind of stuff. But even if you don't end up doing any of like the shimming or the plates or adding the adjustment screws, at the bare minimum, you're going to at least need to straighten those gibs up and clean everything, put it back together, oil it up, and fine-tune the adjustment of all your gibs before you literally do anything. Then if you feel you've still got a lot of rigidity issues, and you'll start to understand what these things mean when you start trying to actually cut some metal, what I'm talking about. I honestly didn't quite understand it to myself when I first got my first lathe. Okay? And that's just what you're going to have to do. You're just going to have to set some time aside and do it. So, I've had a few people that have bought lathes recently, and they have bought them and then turned around and pretty much sold them instantly because they realized how big a piece of crap they were. But they also didn't take the time to do any of this stuff that I'm talking about. I hope me saying this stuff doesn't scare you out of buying your first lathe. I mean, yes, you can use it out of the box as it is, but you're just going to have a lot of issues. So, and some people get lucky and have used their lathe right out of the box and not had some of the issues that others have had. But being just anything like this that's mass-produced, Chinese-made, then it just is what it is. Quality is all over the map. Doesn't matter if it's a name brand like this one or a non-name brand. You've heard me say earlier, Precision Matthews. Precision Matthews is probably one of the few, maybe Weiss would be another one, that makes a product that you can use out of the box. And even those can use some TLC. But you're going to pay some big money for that. A 10-inch Precision Matthews lathe is well over $2,000. So, I think that's where we'll wrap up this video. In the next one, we'll start going over what some of this other stuff is, what some of this tooling is, what some of it does, and what tooling and stuff I recommend. I will say, real quick, your absolute first purchase the same day that you do buy your lathe is get a quick change tool post. I personally got an OXA one when I first bought this. I found it that it wasn't rigid enough for me. I kept wanting to be able to take deeper and harder cuts, so I eventually moved up to an AXA. You're going to have some trouble fitting an AXA on this size lathe if you do get an 8x16, but it obviously can be done. You're going to have to bore out the stud on the compound, and then you're going to have to watch what style tools you use to set your tool height. Again, that's for another video, but I do want to say at a bare minimum, get an OXA tool post the first day that you do it, or get an AXA if you're planning on trying to make this lathe something that you're going to want to do a lot of work with and use for a long time to come. Oh, and buy a light. Always buy a light. That'll wrap it up for this video. We will see you on the next one. Talk to you guys later.